Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bill Baker with Firestorm, and we're pleased to have you joining us for this webinar that's part of the Crisis Coach webinar series. Our host and co-sponsor for this series of webinars is the Black Swan Solutions organization. We're very pleased to have them to join us as part of this webinar series. We invite you also to become our friend on Facebook. Oh, there's
I think we want to
you
talk
missed
a little bit about Black
Jim,
before we go to Facebook.
Change the order. Okay, you can follow Black Swan Solutions, and you can find out about them. Black Swan is a leading global provider of crisis management and risk mitigation services, and they are very easy to work with, and we're very proud of our relationship with them. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. You can become our friend at Facebook, Firestorm Solutions. You can follow us on Twitter, Firestorm Soul. And there is a hashtag, and hashtag is Crisis Coach. Please keep in mind that the presentation today is not complete without accompanying oral comments and discussion. And the work product provided and the information mentioned must be read in conjunction with your organization's personal counsel. Keep in mind that the comments and the information are not legal advice or legal opinion. Today we're going to be discussing communication breakdown. It's always the same. And we invite you to also go to Firestorm or to Black Swan Crisis Solutions, where you can watch past webinars through recorded links, and you can register for future webinars in this series. Our presenters today are Michelle Colosimo. She's the director at Black Swan Solutions, and our good friend and president, Jim Satterfield. He's one of the founders of Firestorm. Michelle, Jim, over to you, please.
Michelle, any words for us as we get started today?
No, I just think I'm glad to see the amount of people that are here and interested in learning about this really important topic. I think it's really a hot item and a hot button for a lot of people, because you want to be able to respond and communicate. It's just how do you do it, and also thinking about what are those challenges you run into and want to be prepared for when you're faced with these types of situations.
Black Swan responds to crises of all types. It could be an airplane crash, a major industrial accident. It could be a cyber breach. And so the communications become extremely critical in those crisis areas. And in the webinar that we did, I think, 2 months ago together, you're focused heavily on the lessons learned from bad things happening, and I believe there were some 12 different takeaways there. And today what we wanted to do was to explore a little bit more about communications breakdown. It's always the same. And I was on the phone this morning with Karen Mazzullo. Karen is our EVP for social media risk. She's our Chief Intelligence Officer. And she reminded me that there's a Led Zeppelin song going way back called Communications Breakdown, and then she proceeded to sing it to me. And I tried to get her on our webinar this afternoon live so you could hear Karen sing associated with it. So if you'll post comments or questions back to Karen that you would encourage her to sing on a future webinar, I think that would be helpful as we think about communications breakdowns. And as we think about that, and we're going to have a conversation on this topic today, hopefully you'll pick up some insights that would be a help. And when we think about the fact that it's always the same, I'm reminded of the movie Cool Hand Luke and the comment there from the prison warden over the chain gangs, and he goes, "What we have here is a failure to communicate," as he dealt with Cool Hand Luke and going through those areas. And unfortunately, we see this failure to communicate as a repeated access problem in every event. We as Black Swan does also are responding to crises on a daily basis and are generally handling multiple events at the same time. But we see the same pattern repeated over and over again. It's always the same concept here, where people feel like they need to say something, but they're unsure of what to say and how to say it. And in fact, there's this feeling in many cases we have to get out in front of this, we have to get on the other side, we have to get a press release out, we have to hold a press conference. And so there was a pressure to communicate just to say that you communicated. And that pressure comes not only from external audiences, customers, clients, others in the public area, the media, internally from employees, but from board members and senior leadership within the organization. So what we really want to do today in the next 45 minutes is talk about some of the confusion around crisis communications and bring some clarity of where you start to come together so that you can't use that line of what we have here is a failure to communicate in the process that goes forward. Now, the example that I gave earlier about just communicating to communicate can be the next crisis. So with the slide that says, what can you identify your organization's next crisis? We can, and in many cases that relates back to the point that how you respond, what you say, will either accelerate or intensify the crisis that you're in at this point in time. And the other way that we can do that with the word how up there is the intelligence network. You've got to be monitoring what's being said today on social media and traditional media, because those things determine what's going on. We're working with a school and some camps right now that have different events that have come up and escalated, and now the intensity is certainly appearing. So if you're not looking at what's going on, this failure to identify and monitor all the threats, that monitoring aspect is a critical element, and that's one of the top, there are 5 common failures, and that's clearly one of those 5 as we go into it. So as we carry forward here, the how is we have to be aware, we have to be prepared, and we have to have a plan in place, and we're going to go inside of that a little bit and give you some examples as we move forward. Clearly, Michelle, if you're responding to a cyber breach or an airplane crash, I think the messages would be entirely different. Is that a fair assumption?
Absolutely, and going back to the comment that you were talking about with social media, back in the day per se, when we didn't have social media, you had time to an event happen to think about what you're going to say before it got out in broadcast media. Now with the social media, you're talking seconds after something happens that people find and see what's going on. And I think that puts more of that pressure on, I need to say something, I need to do something, and what do I say? And that's where I think you start to see those challenges.
And as you think about that, that golden hour that we used to have decades ago is now in seconds that information is out and going. So if you're not monitoring that, you'll find that you're responding to the old piece of information and not the current new one that's out there. So as we move from this how and the monitoring of it, and I guess 2 statistics just to give before we jump off this slide. If someone has ill intent, 80% of the time someone else knows. So if someone doesn't like your company, doesn't like your brand, or has some behavior of concern or a threat that's there, it's not only them, it's others, as we've seen coming forward just recently with the shootings in Chattanooga, that that young man had shared with others some of his thoughts and feelings associated with it. The second percentage I want to give you is that 67% of the time, 2 or more people know. And when 2 or more people know, they talk, and where do they talk? They're talking on social media. So today, if you don't have an intelligence network, you're going to find yourself with messages that don't relate to what you need to focus on. So we talked about the how. What I want to do now, if I can get my computer to cooperate here and move to the next slide. There we go. We'll go back. Is to talk about why. We've all been around children and seen what they would say or do at any particular point in time. And I think it's important then for us to focus on why are we communicating. If you had a child who was about to put their hand on the stove, and you said, don't put your hand on the stove, then they go, why? And then you said, well, because the stove is on. Why? Because it's going to be dinner. And as you go through that process of asking the why in each of these areas, the first piece of advice that we will give you today is make sure that when someone says we need to send a message out, we need to communicate in this crisis, is to ask why. And until you've asked that 5 times, you're not going to fully understand those aspects. We're currently working with several companies right now around cyber breach and making sure that they have the adequate controls and the event activation matrix, and which we'll mention in a minute or two, and some of the other elements there. But universally, none of them have a cyber breach crisis communications plan with predetermined messages based upon for the stakeholders, because we can identify the threats and risks, we can identify the impacts, so we can go on and plan those messages out in advance, and we'll share that as we continue on. So you've got to understand the why of all communication. The value of any communications must be weighed against the potential exposure or liability created by those. If you are releasing information, do you have the right to release the information? Are you violating something internally where information should be kept confidential? Many times in dealing in medical environments or school environments or even employees, you cannot comment about a particular individual within your organization or group at this point, because you would breach confidentiality rules and laws at that point in time. And also your statements then expand that potential. If the media is talking about it and you jump immediately into that conversation, now you have a debate going back and forth. You have 2 different sides, and that discussion continues on and gets larger legs within it. So what we would do is to tell you we need to stop and figure out what's the exposure if we say something, and now have we started opening a door that's going to lead us to additional comments in coming through. So the first piece of advice we want to give you is to stop and ask why. Now, in any type of an area, following the predict, plan, perform methodology is correct. Understand the vulnerabilities and threats, what are the impacts, how you're going to monitor the triggers, have the plans, the policies, the procedures, who can talk to the media, who can't, what's your position on social media, is this trained with all of your employees on an annual basis, are they signing that they understand that they're not the spokesperson, and then testing it. We see, and I think we mentioned this in the webinar we did yesterday, if some of you may have been able to be on it with Dr. Robert Chandler, is making crisis communications a part of your test exercises within your firm. You know, seeing what the messages are. Understand the medium that you're going to use to communicate those will make a significant difference. And when we take the predict, plan, perform, and now push it directly over into the communications area, and particularly crisis communications, now you see the 3 elements that are here. Predict, who's the audience, and what are their concerns? Because that's going to drive the formation of messages as we carry forward. What we would tell a board member versus telling a customer could differ greatly in the level of information that we would share and to come together. So as we're doing the crisis communications, we're always focused on the audience and the concerns. We saw 2 years ago with the crash of the plane in Indonesia, where they sent text messages out to people that confirming that their family member was dead. Obviously, that was a problem from that perspective. So as you look at the second in the plan, you want to tailor the message, the messenger, and the media that you use, or medium that you use to deliver that message. We all react differently when we get a text message versus an email versus a phone call versus hearing an announcement from another source. And hearing about it at the right time and the right way becomes very critical. We're involved with a school who's currently having some issues and going forward, and some additional information came out, and the parent of the child that was involved heard the information from a third party and not from the school first, and that created a second problem. So as you think about it, tailoring the message, the messenger, and media, and formatting it to the specific stakeholder that you're going to, that's going to change the outcome. That's going to give us a different area. And then focus on your 3 key messages. People aren't going to be able to understand a 15 points or 20. You want to have home bases, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and then each message, each question that's out there, you want to have 3 answers for that question. Not different, but additional information. And as we generally deliver that, we wouldn't try to deliver all 3 messages at the same time. You deliver 1 message, wait for the response, and then to do the follow-up. So think about the predict, plan, perform as we go through and talk about crisis communications. Now, our objectives then directly parallel that. We've got to assess the situation. In the webinar that was done yesterday on risk assessment as part of crisis communications with Dr. Chandler, if you want to go back and view that, you can go to the Firestorm website and click into it. There's also a brief associated with it. So that risk assessment becomes very critical. And then we implement actions to identify the key audiences, align the messages maps, and that's the pre-written messages. And just because we have a message map doesn't mean that we don't adjust it or tweak it as we go through. Monitor those events, because what we learn in the first 24 hours is generally wrong, and we'll reinforce that toward the end of our discussion today. And then coordinate and minimize the rumors, and if you don't know what those rumors are, it's going to be very tough to minimize them. And make sure that we are supporting our brand in areas as we go along. We don't want to do anything that would jeopardize those. Now, if you haven't created an... Sure, Michelle, jump in.
This is Michelle. I just want to jump on that too. I think another part of what you're talking about is also the priority of who you're going to communicate with, when, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying even a little bit ago, you know, who has been impacted, what's the level of that impact, and making sure those people get the information first before going to those other layers. I mean, obviously we want to get communications out to media because they're asking, they're pounding on your door to get that information, but if you've got people who are personally impacted or affected by that, you want to make sure they get the information first about what's going on versus it getting leaked out through media so they get it in those other ways. So I feel like that priority is so crucial, and even in thinking about it too, if it's your place of employment, you know, and it's impacting, you know, say your customers, you want to communicate with your employees first so they're aware, because what happens is the customers, whomever they might be, are going to turn to your employees to get information as well. So I think that that's such also a critical component when you're looking at this order.
Great points, and 100% on target. If it's my family, me, impacted, I want to hear first from you. I don't want to hear about it on the television set. I don't want to read about it on the internet. And this is part of positioning who you are, is that personal aspect of delivering it. And so even going back here, it's the message, the messenger, and the media or medium that you use becomes so very, very critical. And you see the word there, concerns, folks. If you don't know what their concerns are and what they're asking, then we're going to be giving the wrong message to the wrong person at the wrong time. Now, one thing that can help you is if you have looked at your plans, have you created an event activation matrix? And what's the event, in defining what's a minor event, something that's a low impact event. An incident, it's significant, it's adverse, it has a limited impact, doesn't impact everybody in your organization. So you know what, we're not going to tell everybody. We're not keeping it a secret. We're only going to deliver that information to that particular group of people that were involved. And then finally, something that's a business crisis. It affects everyone across a wide area to carry forward. So those things become listed down as you would put them together with descriptors so that someone can see, oh, for this, here's what describes a minor event. Here's what describes it elevated to an incident. Oh, this is now, no question, a business crisis, and that's going to change our response level as we're going into it. The event activation matrix is always designed for the organization, the company, the school, the government entity that's involved in it, to control that message area so that all that messaging comes together. As we're thinking about crisis management, it starts at this point because there's someone in your organization that knows about it and they fail to alert someone else. And that particular area becomes an important one. Now, the next line that you see there with the event, action, message, responsibilities, and crisis management team, shows that you can even simplify it and have a chart that says, for this event, here's the action we want you to take, here's the message that would need to go out, and here's the responsibilities that are assigned, and here's what the crisis management team will be doing behind it. We actually took the format that you see with event, action, message, and responsibilities in a crisis team and designed a strategy for mass meetings, like a church service or an event, so that it would be very clear who's supposed to do what if while we're in the middle of the concert or we're in the middle of the Sunday morning worship service, that those things would come together to be put in place. So if we've got a clear event activation matrix, then I would recommend that you share that within your entire organization. The chances are that our communications will be more on target. Now, there is a cycle in this. We gather information, we create drafts and edits, and we can certainly put some of those together in advance. We get approval, we distribute, we manage the inquiries back, and then we monitor externally to see how that's being received and what's being said. We're recording this today in August, and certainly there's been some discussions of Donald Trump and his comments about what's a war hero and what's involved in that. But looking at how that information is gathered and how it's communicated can become a significant element within that cycle. If you don't have an approval process, if someone's creating a message and sending it out without approval, that's where the plant manager or the branch manager or an employee, many times in a crisis event that we're seeing, someone feels that the media truck is here, I'm going to go on and talk, this is my chance to get my 15 minutes of fame included within that project. So in looking at this, you want to make sure that everybody is aware of the approval, because that's another breakdown point where we see it repeated over and over again. The intelligence network.
Jim,
I'm sorry.
I'm going to jump in again, Michelle. Yep, no problem. I just want to focus on that approval piece too, because I think it's so important that you have that process in place. But what we've also found when we're assisting organizations in crisis is that it gets stuck there as well. That sometimes those that are being deemed the approvers are spending too much time, or there's too many layers in relation to who needs to approve, that it delays that message getting out. So thinking about that, kind of what's your suggestion or approach about how do you, yes, you need your approvers, but how do you make sure it gets through that process quickly as well, so that it doesn't delay and cause a negative effect because that message went out too late?
Planning that is a critical aspect. That's where the drills and tests come in. Having the pre-approved messages certainly accelerate and help a great deal in that. We want to get the right message out at the right time in the right way. And if we establish that and let everybody know, that's as important as all the other actions we're taking. We see what could have been a crisis that could have been handled in a 5-figure way suddenly get elevated to 6 or 7 figures. So it goes into the hundred thousands or millions of dollars because of this failure in coming out. And you do not want to be driven by the media and other parties in putting those elements together. And one of the ways to keep that approval process is if we've established it and we understand it and they're seeing the intelligence that's coming in, that's going to transmit the urgency associated with it. As we carry forward, knowing what's being monitored here, and there's 2 levels. One is a broader listening level that establishes a baseline. Therefore, suddenly if we see a surge in communications, we know something's going on. And then at a look level, where we look particularly at an event or a person of interest and carry that forward. Firestorm's done a series of webinars around the intelligence network. Karen is just finishing up one this month that you can go and look at. In fact, recorded this morning for the University of Alabama, that you can go back and listen to that on the first phase of it. And then secondly, you can go back and next month, and there'll be one on the look phase on the intelligence network. But this is an area in one of the failures that we see repeated over. So if you think about the communications components, and if you're starting to, where do we start in trying to write this thing? We're certainly going to express concern or support within this area and offer condolences. Every crisis is a human crisis, and how could you not be? We followed into a crisis that a PR firm had been handling for a client, and they trained the client president on how not to say he was sorry when asked, are you sorry if these people died? And they unfortunately kept a video of that training, and so later when it came up to trial, they were able to show the jury, here's the president of the company learning how not to say he was sorry. And of course someone's sorry if a child dies, or someone's mother or father or brother or sister. How could you not be that way? So our communications certainly has to be sensitive to that. We expect that you have a crisis manager. Having somebody that's managed crises before, and if you're looking for a firm to do that, ask them what crises that they've been involved in, and those next three words, engagement by counsel. Bringing in your crisis manager through your counsel will make a big difference, so that some of the information that's found out should have the potential for attorney-client privilege in being established on that. And then that way we're sure that we're not going to have some of the mistakes that are made. We're always going to tell the truth. The cover-up is worse than the element almost every single case, and we're going to carry forward. We're going to talk about the next three items several times before the webinar is over. Those are the three messages from Virginia Tech. Will not be defined by the event, will invent the future, will embrace the families. And we're going to go through those a little bit more in just a moment, because that's the beginning point of what you put your communications together. In general, we're not going to talk about the event that occurred. We'll let the police or the fire or the regulator talk about those areas. Let them be associated with the problem. It's not defining your business. It's not defining your school. It's not defining your organization. That you're going to put plans in place. Preparedness is a continuous improvement process, that you're going to be inventing the future. But really the focus should be on the people that were impacted, the employees that lost their job, the people that were hurt, the families that are into those areas. And here's that why communicate. We want you to always focus on why are we giving this communications. And the up and down arrows, we've got to go within the organization and externally, and understanding that at every point. And it's always about who's getting the message. It's not about the person delivering the message. It's about the person receiving the message, whether they're listening to it or reading it. And in many cases, the majority of the time, if we're dealing with an event very early in the cycle, the event's just occurred and we've got to get it out, we would encourage those to be phone calls. We would encourage that to be verbal communications to those people who need to receive the message. Coming out very early with an email blast or a letter or a press release can be a significant problem. Dealing directly with those that were impacted and doing that verbally would be the best as we carry forward. So home bases are what we're going to deal with whenever we're in doubt. If you're asked a question and you don't have an answer, you'd go back and look at those home bases. And it gives you something to think about so that you can give an answer. Much better to be talking about those than saying no comment. Generally, no comment is interpreted as you're guilty and you know it and you're lying at this point in time. So it will help you with each of those and think about them. What I would encourage you to do if you don't have the home bases is go to your website. Look at your mission statement. Look at the values that describe your company. Pulling those statements together. While this event doesn't define who you are, what does define who you are within your space? And then inventing the future, what are your commitments? What are your planning processes? What do you have into place? And then how do you feel about people? The home bases are generally developed if you're doing media training. And if you haven't done that, I think that's an excellent opportunity. And generally we prefer that the initial spokesperson is not the president of the company, that's not the head of the school or the principal or the superintendent. We're looking for someone else within the organization, because the leadership should be dealing with the crisis, not in that level of communications. And like always, we prefer that you follow HR rule 1, 2, 3. You want to be trained to a depth of 3 people. So here's my primary spokesperson, here's my backup, and here's that second backup. And train all of them and work that together. The other advantages of doing the media training with your crisis management team and your senior leadership goes back to that approval. Everybody has now agreed that those are going to be the themes that we're going to come forward with and share during the media training. So as we think about them a little bit more, there are those things, 3 elements there. And those 3 elements work in almost every crisis that you're going to come together. Take a moment, write them down. We'll not be defined by this event. We will invent the future. We'll embrace the families. If you have those in your pocket and you find yourself in a situation where we need to start responding right now, something's going on, those are safe harbors. Those are opportunities to carry forward and look at them. Now, if we want to drill down into that just a little bit more, let's take it. So we will not be defined by the event. What does define you? There's your homework assignment. Everybody on our webinar today, write down what defines your company. Look at your website. Look at your materials. Look at the history of your company. Are you a family-owned business? Are you been in business for 70 years or 30 years? Are you committed to some aspect of what you do? That's where you want to make sure that everybody is understood. And the beauty of that is this should already be in your vocabulary. This should already be in your communication space that you're comfortable in talking about. Second, we will invent the future. What will you do to make sure that this doesn't happen again or fix the issue? What is it that you're going to do? We're committed to continuous improvement. We're going to review these processes. We're going to be the safest company around. We're going to have more controls in place. The ISO standard for quality, and we think about continuous improvement in quality, or Six Sigma and Kaizen, all of those, SIPOCs, all of those elements are there. But the new ISO standard for quality includes risk, that risk and quality have to be viewed together, and planning on that. So what are you going to do to show that you're going to put those areas in? If we had a mistake, if we didn't have the right notification systems or the right controls or the right monitoring or whatever, we're going to make sure that this is not going to happen again. So here you're talking about the event not defining you, and you're talking about the future and the direction you're going. And people will let you go there. You'll notice that neither one of those are explaining what occurred here. And if that question comes to you, you refer that back to the regulator, the first responders, and the authorities, and let them talk about it. And last, we will embrace the families. What will you do to support those impacted by the crisis? We're going to get food in here. We're going to arrange shelter. We're going to take care of these things. We've assigned counselors. If you have an event that's occurred and you have employees or customers or students or campers that are injured and they go to the hospital, you're sending your staff there to be with them, to support the families, to give that level of support at every step along the way. So understanding about that, what we're going to be doing is reaching out, because every time a crisis occurs, it's impacting people. It's impacting people internally in your organization or externally in that, and you're going to need to address it. And that helps you back to those stakeholder groups that we need to think about. Now, as we move away from the home basis, and that's the big safe area, and if you played dodgeball when you were growing up, then you know there's a safe area and a zone associated with it. Now we come into specifics. Something happened. So what are the questions that people are going to ask, and what are the answers that you're going to give? You know, we'll do another session with Dr. Chandler, I think next month or the month after, around message maps in particular. So we're going to give you a little bit of a high-level view of that today, and we'll drill down into it in more depth in future webinars to come together. But it's looking at setting a set of questions that would be there so that you can respond to all the anticipated questions. And if you lay out all the questions and you start to say, here's the answer, here's another answer, etc., in many cases you can't give the specific. Well, can you tell me why you didn't fire this person? I can't talk about a specific employee, but I can tell you that we have a practice in our company to whatever to go forward. So you can talk about your procedures and your policies in general instead of talking about a specific person. So if you think about those in that message map, the next step of it would be identify what you want them to know, identify what you need to do to correct any misperceptions that are out there. Now, one of the tricks that you want to do is we don't want to be so eager to communicate that we're in a situation that every time something comes up, we come back. But for each question, you want to prepare the key messages that would relate back to that, and then the supporting message around it. So in a particular area, a school situation we're working with right now, I think there are some 18 different message maps that were laid out for questions that could be anticipated that someone would ask. Now, sometimes the answers from one question to another are very similar, but by laying them out in an orderly format, you would do it. Now, you want to keep the messages short and simple. Generally, a message back and response would be a sentence. As you talk about it that way, it'd be easy to communicate that and put together. And then you need to identify who is that message targeted to, because what you would tell a parent might be different than what you would tell a child. What you would tell a customer would be different necessarily from what you tell an employee related to it. And then you want to talk about the channel or medium that you use. So we're going to say it, as we talked about initially, we recommend you do, or are you going to be sending out an email blast? And practice delivery. At the beginning of our webinar today, I think we startled Bill with what the second slide was. Normally that's one where we invite you to join us on Facebook or Twitter, and so there's a difference in that area. So being ready to communicate will make a significant difference. If you pull the message down, here's a template that you can look at. And so, by the way, there's that reminder again of why are you communicating associated with it. You number them, you get a question or concern. What is the impact around that question? Who is the stakeholder? What's the first message you would say in answer to that question? What's the second? What's the third? And what's the medium? And so this is think of it as a major table that's set up and categorized. Sometimes we'll even do a subheading underneath this to say, here are the 10 questions under that topic. Here are the 15 questions under that topic, just for ease of access. And so normally in a crisis, this would become just printed in a landscape format. You'd circulate that to everyone involved, and you would share, and it gives the points that are needed for those messages as you would respond in each of those areas. As new things come up, you add it into the database, and those questions are coming together as you're planned out. Here's a hint. Go back to your hazard impact matrix. Go back to your vulnerability threat assessment. Go back to your security analysis. Go back to your business impact analysis. Look at all of those things that you've identified that could occur, and then start to say, if this happens, what is my message? Who are my stakeholders going to be? What would they say? And then you could start to plan this in advance instead of trying to do it when time matters most, because rushing these messages out will certainly lead to be a problem associated with it. So, Michelle, I know you do a lot of work in delivering the message for organizations that find themselves in crisis. Any comment that you want to share about message maps?
Well, I think you hit it right on the head. It's so important to have it prepared and planned for ahead of time, but also to be prepared to be flexible, because you never know how people are going to respond to what you say, and you also need to be able to adapt to that as well. And really, when you talk about embracing the families or thinking about it from that standpoint, that's so critical. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of these individuals and getting on the receiving end, and think about that when you're looking at these message maps as to how would you want that message to it and how would you want it said. And that's so critical, because that goes a long way for that person that's actually receiving it.
Great insight. And if you put yourself in their shoes and think about, if this was happening to me, if I was an employee of that firm, if this was happening to a loved one in my family, how would I react? What would I think? And if you plan these out in advance, it's going to make a significant difference, and you'll see a change in how the impacts come. And it keeps that event from escalating and becoming a significant event to define your company. When we think about a crisis, everything you see there is in place. You've got an escalating flow of events. I guarantee you, you're going to have insufficient and inaccurate information. Someone's going to come to you and say, this is what happened, and you'll find out not exactly. Someone's going to come and say, well, we did everything that we could do, and you're going to find out, no, you didn't. We responded in a situation which said, well, we did an alarm and told everyone to come inside, and we found out they never did a page. They never did the announcement to bring everyone back inside. So insufficient and inaccurate information is a challenge in communications. That's why you want to keep to the general statements and not the specifics. If you're explaining in this area, you're losing. Now, we said that a couple of times. You're clearly going to be under intense scrutiny. It's different than any of the other aspects of running your business. A crisis is not business as usual. A crisis is business as unusual. And so I would encourage you to plan that out. You're going to lose command and control. If you've had an event that's a physical environment event, then you're going to have the first responders coming. And so the police or the fire will be controlling your location. They're going to be dealing and sending out messages. And that's okay. They're going to be talking about what occurred or what they're investigating. Similarly, if there's been an airline crash, you're going to have the FAA talking about what's going on in the investigation there. Or if it's been another event in the banking area, you may find the banking regulators that get involved in. Command and control will be different. How you respond easily create a second crisis, and that response can certainly be greater. It's your brand and your reputation. It'll keep the focus on the fact that every crisis is a human crisis. Who are the people impacted? What are they going to be concerned about? That's going to be carrying it forward. And as Michelle said earlier, silence is equal to guilt. If you don't get that information out, if your voice isn't there, someone else is going to define you. And always remember that a crisis is coming as a surprise, and you're going to have to be carried forward. And I've said, I think, in these webinars and in other areas, the last time a surprise was good, I was 5, and it was my birthday. If you're at work, a surprise is not good. It's going to be a problem. So let me put these attributes in perspective. The first thing to remember is that in the first 24 hours, almost everything you learn is wrong. That's why you see retractions. That's why you see statements coming back. Be extremely cautious with any communications in the 24 hours. That's where we're going to see this thing repeating as we go forward. Number 2, in the following years, it's going to be about consequences. This event isn't over just because the fire truck left, just because the police finished from those aspects. If there's litigation, this is going to last for years. So an event that occurred and was over in a matter of seconds or minutes could, in fact, linger within your organization for years to come. And so the focus from the very first response to the emergency or the crisis has to be on what are the consequences and dealing with those. So this is about consequence management. Crisis communications have direct impact on consequence management. So stop and ask the why. If you haven't asked the why, you're going to have a problem associated with it. Validate the why at the very beginning, as we talked about earlier. So where do you go from here? Make sure that you set up an intelligence network. Know today what's going to happen tomorrow, and be prepared to monitor all the threats and risks that you've looked for, and look for the ways to do that. Today, you really can't afford not to know what's going to happen tomorrow. I would encourage you to contact Black Swan or Firestorm. We've had some questions that have come in during it, and we're going to make every effort to reach out to everyone on the webinar today to try to answer your questions there. And again, there will be a brief after the webinar that you can download. It'll take us a couple of days to put that up, or if you want to view the webinar again, you can. I would encourage you to align your communications and plans to best practices. If you're not doing that, you're exposing your organization, and I would recommend that you do an exercise. We're going to do a virtual exercise next month. We're going to do one on one day for schools and another one on a different day for businesses. That's a great opportunity for you to get your crisis management team or your emergency team or your safety team around a table and go through the exercise and go through making those critical decisions and what would you do, and then figuring out what your communications are associated with that. And you can go on our website and see a listing when that occurs. I would encourage you to create your own intelligence network or schedule training. We could certainly be glad to work with you. Our thanks to Black Swan for underwriting today's webinar and being a part in that. And you got the telephone number there, 888-723-2466. And I would encourage you to go to the website and look at Black Swan's crisissolutions.com. You can learn a great deal about how to deal with communications in a very stressful period of time in operations. If you want to view this or other webinars, you can go to firestorm.com or send an email at webinars@firestorm.com or call us at 800-321-2219. Michelle, before we sign off, any last words of advice for everyone today?
I mean, communication is key, and it will make or break you. So the more you're prepared and having the right people in place is going to be the ultimate goal in relation to your success in response to those crises.
And the other comment that I would add to that is this is one where outside resources help, whether it's using a call center and communications capability like Black Swan. They have over 200 people that they can roll and stand up a communications center to do mass personal communications at critical points, or bringing in a firm like Firestorm to help with the crisis management, critical decision support, and the communications. That'll make a difference. Hope everyone has a wonderful summer. Thanks for joining us today. There'll be more webinars next month, and we look forward to continuing the series with Black Swan in September. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye-bye.